You are listening to the Maple Footy Podcast. This is the unofficial football podcast of the North. I'm your host, Sam Little. Find me at official Sam Little on Instagram. There's nothing left to say except for sit back, enjoy, and welcome to the show.
Hello, yes, welcome back to another Maple Footy Podcast, the unofficial football podcast of the North. And yeah, Champions League final recap. But first, it has been a big week in the footballing world, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the biggest stories coming out of this week. Then, of course, jump into our Champions League final recap. So let's get into some of these big stories. Kylian Mbappe has had the least surprising here we go of all time. And yes, the here we go is referring to journalist Fabrizio Romano. After 7 years at PSG, it's time for Mbappe to start a new chapter with the club we all knew he'd be going to. It suits him. The best players play for the best teams. It truly feels like it's always been Mbappe's end goal to play for Real Madrid. And now, good luck to anyone who wants to beat Real Madrid. Following his Dortmund departure, Marco Reus is now in advanced talks with LA Galaxy. It looked like he'd be heading to Charlotte or St. Louis, but as it stands, LA Galaxy are actually the frontrunners for the former Dortmund captain. And Olympiacos beats Fiorentina in the 117th minute of the Europa Conference League. They join Roma and West Ham as the previous winners of the UEFA's newest European competition. Say what you want about this competition. I know it's newer and I know it's more so for the smaller European clubs, but it is nice to see these European clubs get a shot at European glory, something that they may not haven't have thought of being possible before this competition. And seeing the fans' reactions to Olympiacos winning this title, yeah, it's hard to argue with the fact that it's not a legitimate competition. Jose Mourinho has now officially been announced as the new manager of Fenerbahce. This follows his latest stint in Roma that started out greatly but sadly fizzled out in the end, as most Jose tenures do. And I say that being a massive fan of Jose Mourinho. This special one will now add Turkey to the list of countries that he has managed in. You look at Chelsea twice, Manchester United, Tottenham of England, Roma, of course, in Italy, Porto in Portugal, Real Madrid in Spain. And I think it will be interesting to see how he does with the Turkish Giants, as this is something totally new for Jose, I think, as a manager of someone who's not really in the big, not to say the Turkish league isn't a big league, but the traditional top 5 leagues in Europe. And Chelsea got 2 here we goes this week, as it looks like they have found their manager for the following season, following Poch's exit from the club. Enzo Maresca, one of Pep Guardiola's disciples who managed Leicester in the Championship last season and Parma for half a season before that, will most likely be taking charge of the Blues next season. It's being reported that this is a 5-year deal, and this will be Chelsea's 3rd proper managerial appointment since Bully and co. had taken over. Now, if we count interims, we're up to 5. And of course, Thomas Tuchel was the manager when they took over. So that's really 6 managers in just under 2 years. Yep, 6. Amazing. Hopefully they've actually found the man this time, although they've said that about both Potter and Poch, so my hopes aren't exactly high, but hey, we'll see. And Chelsea's other here we go this year is Tosin Adarbayo. The 26-year-old center back enjoyed a great season with Fulham and was attracting interest from top clubs such as Chelsea and Manchester United. It does look like Fulham's number 4 will be heading to the blue part of West London come next season. Taking a break from the European action, as we are the Maple Footy Podcast, TFC and Hamilton's Forge FC will be taking each other on in a 2-legged semifinal of the Canadian Championship, which will be a rematch of the 2020 final, which was actually played in 2022 due to a certain virus that you may or may not remember. Speaking of these two teams in CPL action, Forge had beaten York United yesterday comfortably 3-0 at home with goals from captain Kyle Becker, Tristan Borges, and Loni Daniel Parra. And where TFC had blown a 2-0 lead against DC United in MLS, Bernardeschi has received yet another suspension, the second this season. And from one of the guys that's supposed to be a locker room leader, quote unquote, I don't think it's a really good look. Just my opinion, but he's not alone on the suspension list, as Gomez will be joining him following his 2 yellow cards in that game against DC United. And looking back at European football, Leonardo Bonucci has officially announced his retirement from the game. There's been speculation and rumors circulating over the last 2 weeks-ish that the 37-year-old legendary center back is now going to be hanging up the boots. And he's best known for his time with Juventus. He had a very, very successful career, and in my opinion, will go down as one of the greatest center backs of his generation. He won 9 Serie A titles, 8 of them with Juventus, 4 Coppa Italias, 5 Supercoppa Italianas, and a Euros champion with Italy. Individually, he racked up some accolades as well. FIFA World 11 twice, Serie A Team of the Year 4 times, Serie A Footballer of the Year in 2015-16, UEFA Team of the Year 2016, Europa League Squad of the Season twice, Champions League Team of the Season 2016-2017, European Championship Team of the Tournament 2020, Global Soccer Awards Best Defender of the Year 2021, and a Man of the Match performance in the final of the Euros against England, where he scored a goal to bring Italy back to life, and as well as converted his penalty in the shootout. What a career, and what a legend. And following the Champions League result yesterday, Luka Modric is Real Madrid's most decorated player with 26 trophies to his name. And just a reminder that he left Tottenham at 26 with 0 trophies to his name. Now he has as many trophies in his 12-year career at Real Madrid as Spurs do in their whole history. Football is a funny sport. But speaking of the Champions League final, let's get into it. So, the Champions League final, to no one's surprise, Real Madrid won 2-0. And they picked up their 15th UCL trophy. And yeah, I mean, I don't really think anyone's surprised, right? Like, we all thought Madrid was going to win. David met their Goliath. It's what Real Madrid does. They win the Champions League. 18-time finalists, and they walk out with a trophy on 15 occasions. And that is truly, truly insane. It truly is their competition. They know what to do, and they know how to win. I don't want Dortmund's run to be forgotten, though, as they were doubted the whole way starting back in the group stage, where they were in the group of death with Newcastle, AC Milan, and PSG. Then the knockout stages with PSV, Atletico Madrid, and then PSG again. They were underdogs the whole way through, and Real Madrid were just too big a hurdle to jump. And now I'm not going to sit here and tell you every player's individual stats, who had more XG and possession. I'm just going to give you my opinion on the performances and players, what I saw with my own eyes. I'm not a massive fan of some of these stats, you know, like XG, XA, all that stuff. I don't know. I don't really much care for that stuff. Some of them I do find helpful, but others I just kind of find okay. So I'm not going to sit here and just list all those out. If you want me to start doing that, you may be disappointed, because I don't really think I'm going to be doing that in the near future, at least. And in the first half, I think Dortmund was actually the far better team, but predictably, they missed their chances, and that came back to haunt them. Fulkrug off the post, Brandt Smith and Adeyemi rounding Courtois, but his touch was a bit too heavy, and then the chance was gone. Definitely some positives. If you've ever watched Madrid in the Champions League, though, you kind of knew what was going to happen. Once we went into the second half at 0-0, there was only one way this was going to go. And I actually do think Dortmund was still on top and the better team up until maybe the 60th minute. Then they started to look tired, and their manager just took too long to make some changes. And once he did, it felt a bit too late. And then after they made their first change, 2 minutes later, Madrid scores. And to me, that was the game over. Madrid didn't need that second goal, but it really was the icing on the cake when they did get it. And now looking at the individual players for Borussia Dortmund, I actually thought their back line was pretty solid. Their keeper, Kupal, I thought made some great saves and couldn't have done anything about the goals. He was kind of left to dry for the goals. Really, honestly, nothing he could do. I don't really think a goalkeeper in the world stops either one of them. So, you can't really point the finger at him. I thought Schlotterbeck and especially Hummels were standouts. I thought Hummels was a brick wall. Nothing was getting past him. And if it was his last game for the club, he did himself quite proud. His distribution was also on point. I thought a lot of his passes were really breaking the line of Real Madrid, and I think they're kind of finding him kind of hard to deal with in a sense. He almost looked like a deep-lying playmaker at points. And now looking to their left with the left back, Ian Maatsen. Now, I actually do think he had quite the good game. He kept Rodrigo really quiet and made him look a non-factor throughout the game, and a lot of the time he looked like a very, very bright spot for Dortmund and a creative outlet. Now, sadly, his performance will probably only be remembered for that wayward back pass that led to Vinicius's goal and the final nail in Dortmund's coffin, but I don't want his entire performance to go forgotten and unrecognized, because I actually do think he did have a very good performance. Now, whether he gets that permanent move to Dortmund, goes back to Chelsea, or finds a move elsewhere, I do think his future is bright. He's only 21, 22, so he does have a lot of years left in those legs, knock on wood. And yeah, I do think he's unlucky to kind of be the guy that will probably be remembered for that back pass. But regardless, I do think he had a good game and a very bright future. Now, looking to their other fullback, Ryerson, I don't think he had a good game at all. I have seen some talk of people saying that they did. I don't know, maybe I'm in the wrong here, but this is just my opinion. And yeah, I just don't think he had the best of games. He looked shaky and nervous anytime he was on the ball or was anywhere near him. Vinicius had him on toast almost anytime Madrid were on the attack, and most of their attacks were coming down that side. He just looked out of his depth, which I actually do think is pretty disappointing, because when Dortmund faced PSG in the semis, he actually kept Mbappe quite quiet. So maybe it was just an off game. Vinicius had his number. I don't know. It just wasn't his day, I don't think. Now, looking at their midfield, an early midfield scare for Emre Can was soon forgotten as he quietly went about his business. Marcel Sabitzer also had a pretty quiet game. Neither of them really stuck out, in my opinion, and didn't have a whole ton to do. They didn't stick out in a good or a bad way. It was just kind of, okay, they're there. I don't know. I just don't really think they didn't stick out one way or another, which doesn't really leave me with a whole ton to talk about them. But I do have some things to say about Julian Brandt, who also I don't think was good at all. I thought he was, quite frankly, just bad. He didn't look up for it, looked confused, slow, and lost, seemed to lose the ball or get caught in it whenever he was on it. I think he was honestly lucky to see the pitch in the second half. I personally probably would have pulled him. I don't think he deserved to go back out for another half. He was costing Dortmund at times, I thought. His only memorable moment, I would say, was his chance in the first half that went wide. It was a difficult chance, but a genuine opportunity, I thought. And other than that, he didn't do much of anything. He wasn't creating. And yeah, he just looked out of his depth, which was really disappointing, because I am a fan of Julian Brandt, but once again, just maybe not his afternoon, not his day. I don't know. But yeah, sadly, just didn't work out for him yesterday. And I think it was a very disappointing performance, one that he'd probably want back. And then looking at Dortmund's front three, another person I was really disappointed with was Jadon Sancho. He looked like the Manchester United Sancho. Uncertain of himself, he lacked that final ball or any real spark to his game, which is a shame because he's had such an exciting and really fun to watch career resurrection, and he is such a unique playmaker, but he was holding on to the ball far too long and would find himself giving it away a lot. Anytime he'd kind of dance through defenders, he'd get to like one extra almost, and then they'd take the ball off him. He'd do one too many, and then he wouldn't get the chance to pass the ball off or take a shot or anything. He just like looked lost once it came time to make a decision, which once again is very disappointing. He didn't create much, and if it was his Dortmund swan song, it will be one to forget. I'll be interested to see where he does end up following this summer, if he's going to stay at United, if Dortmund's going to pay the release clause, or if Sancho is going to leave United. I think he's done enough to show United that he is a good player, and he is better than what they have. And even if United don't want him, I would say that there will be teams that should at least want in for him. Looking at Dortmund striker Fulkrug, I think he did the most with what he could. He had 2 real chances. The one off the post was unlucky. Then he had a bullet header that really would have been kind of lucky to have gone in. It was one of those ones where it was like, oh, great, you got there kind of thing. And if you had scored, it would have been great. But, like, I don't know. That bullet header, he struck it with such power, and that's really all he could do. He didn't have any time to place it. He was pretty far out. I think he struck it around the penalty area a bit to the right of that. And, yeah, it would have taken a lot to beat Courtois from there. It was a very nice header, though. And then he did get a goal that was ruled offside. I think he wasn't bad, but he didn't also have the best service either. And now we're looking at Adeyemi, who I thought was probably Dortmund's most likely to create or do anything of their attackers. He looked lively, he looked good, he got in behind Madrid's back line on a number of occasions, and he looked like he had Carvalhal's number for a good portion of the game. He had that chance early in the first where he rounded Courtois, but, when Courtois is literally a brick wall, you're going to have to touch it a little bit heavy to get it around him. The problem is once he had touched it heavy, he kind of put himself in an awkward spot where the defense had gotten back and there was no one to really find in the box. So the chance had come and gone. Now, obviously, it's easy to say, well, if he touched it lighter, he could have scored. But in the moment, it is pretty difficult to go, oh, shoot, this friggin' massive human being is running at me. I need to round this guy. And alas, he didn't hit it perfectly. And I actually do think Dortmund's turning point of momentum, where they kind of went on the down, was when Adeyemi started to look tired in and around that 60-minute mark. His race had been run, and it was a totally different game after that. He looked like their outlet for a good portion of the game. And really, once he wasn't performing, the team didn't look like they were performing. And I think that's kind of where Madrid started to smell blood, and they really took advantage, and they showed why they are who they are. And sadly, Dortmund never really came back from Adeyemi just kind of running out of gas. And yeah, I think I would say he was probably Dortmund's best player. Maybe Hummels. It'd be between those two. I think it would depend on what you're looking for, either an attacker or a defender. So it'd probably be between those two. So I think he had a good game, and the subs for Dortmund didn't really do much. They didn't have a ton of time to work with anyways. Royce and Haller were, in my opinion, the only 2 potential game changers. But once that first goal had gone in, it was game over, in my opinion, and they were never coming back from that. It is sad that Royce's swan song kind of ends like this, but I guess in a sense it's also kind of poetic. And I say this as a massive Marco Royce fan. I guess it kind of is fitting that in his first season, he loses the Champions League final in Wembley, and then in his last season, he loses the Champions League final at Wembley. And it does suck because I would have loved to have seen Royce win the big one, but sadly, football, as Dortmund's own Twitter account said, football's not always a fairy tale. And sadly for Marco Royce, it really wasn't. And for Borussia Dortmund, the fairy tale did come to an end in that final, and it was an incredible run. I will say that. Now, I don't always love to praise people for not winning, but when you look at it, they topped the group of death with PSG, AC Milan, and Newcastle. Then they go to PSV, who, yeah, you probably expect Dortmund to win, but really it was kind of a 50-50 going into it. Then they get Atletico Madrid in the quarterfinals, and Atletico Madrid that looked like this could have been their year after they beat Inter Milan, last year's finalists and Serie A winners. Atletico Madrid beats them, they face Dortmund, and a lot of money was probably on Atletico Madrid to go through, but Dortmund pushed through in a very exciting 2-legged affair, and then Dortmund gets to run it back against PSG. Woodwork was on their side, kept Dortmund in it at times, but Dortmund capitalized on their chances. PSG didn't in those semifinals. And then, of course, in the final. They just didn't capitalize on their chances, and I think that's what kind of bit them. And Real Madrid, you always know, is going to capitalize on their chances when they come, and that was the difference. But yeah, what a run for Dortmund. It would have been nice to see it end in some silverware, but yeah, honestly, I think they can hold their heads high. And now looking at Real Madrid, it was a typical Madrid performance. They look like they might concede, and then they turn it on and win with relative ease in the end. Looking at their back line, I think Courtois was good when he was called upon, made the saves, and kept his clean sheet. Not a whole ton to say about Courtois. I mean, amazing that he came back from an ACL injury. Really only played like a few games before this, and then came back and was like, yeah, I'm going to start the Champions League final. And then he did, and then they won. So, I mean, yeah, good on him. Like, that is pretty insane when you think about it. And I thought their defense actually didn't have the best of games. When they were pressured, they didn't look great. Dortmund were getting through pretty easily, and it was Dortmund who were the masters of their own downfall, as we've already discussed. And once they got anywhere near the box, though, they just looked lost, and Madrid had time to recover. Rudiger and Nacho, I thought, were being split by some line-breaking passes from Hummels or Maatsen, and they just never really looked up for it up until kind of Dortmund turned off. And I'm a massive Rudiger fan, but it definitely wasn't his best game, although it obviously didn't matter in the end. And then Carvajal looked like he wasn't able to handle Adeyemi for a good portion of the game, but it is Carvajal who steps up and pops in the header, which was the real clincher for me. And really, once Adeyemi was kind of taken out of the game, Danny Carvajal kind of looked to get in his own type of flow. He never really looked like anything was going to get past him. So I do think in the end, he'll be remembered for that goal for this game. And rightfully so. You know, you're the goal scorer in Champions League final. That's what you should be remembered for, right? And his fullback partner, Mendy, honestly didn't have a whole ton to do, as Sancho was Sancho's biggest enemy. It was an easy afternoon for the left back, in my opinion, and I don't really have much to say about his performance, to be honest. And looking at the midfield, I think this was the difference maker for Madrid. Valverde and Camavinga were everywhere, breaking up play, controlling possession, finding pockets of space to operate in. Camavinga especially, I thought his distribution was top-notch this game. He looked calm and composed on the ball, especially for a 21-year-old. And this guy's won everything already. This is his second Champions League. Oh my goodness. It's unfair sometimes, honestly. These guys are just too good, aren't they? But yeah, there were some standouts for me. And then Toni Kroos, hard to believe we were watching a man who is just weeks away from retirement, and that was his last game for Real Madrid. It was honestly a typical Kroos performance, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. It's really what we've come to expect from the German legend. Just controlling the flow well, was good in possession, looks so calm and assured on the ball, found some world-class passes, and it was just vintage Toni Kroos. He pops up with that assist for Danny Carvajal with a perfect corner, tested the keeper a couple times on free kicks on a different day that could have maybe found the back of the net, and yeah, he just, don't retire, man. Please, stay. For me, honestly, he'd probably be my man of the match. I thought he was that good. He, like I said, he controlled the game, and I really do think it was Madrid's midfield that were the difference makers, whereas they kind of seemed to show up. Bourissa Dortmund's just kind of either were just kind of there or actually actively costing the team, whereas Real Madrid were on their game, and this is why this team has the titles they do. And then looking at Madrid's attackers, there was really only one standout for me, and I will get into him. But first, I'm going to talk about the other two. I thought Rodrigo was a bit of a non-factor, as I've already touched upon. I couldn't really tell you one thing he even did in the game. He didn't do a whole ton. It wasn't really the Rodrigo performance that we've come to know from the Brazilian. But in the end, obviously, it doesn't matter. He's won the Champions League again. Once again, I think this is his second one, I believe. Could be his third, but definitely his second. I'd have to fact check that. But yeah, just once again, I don't really think he did a whole ton, but in the end, it doesn't matter. It doesn't cost his team. And now the same goes for Jude Bellingham. I know he picked up an assist off that second goal, but much like he was in the knockout stages, he was pretty much a non-factor in this game. He didn't really do a whole ton, didn't step up, didn't show any real character or fight. Didn't win the ball back. Passes weren't great. Didn't create many chances. His typical carrying of the ball, I don't even think he really did a whole ton of. And he spent a lot of the game on the ground complaining. But something that Madrid has that Dortmund doesn't is a plethora of star players. So even though Rodrigo and Bellingham weren't great, they still have guys that can step up and cover for that. Hence why 15. Vinicius Jr., that was his Ballon d'Or moment, wasn't it? From a guy who was accused of playing against his own team just a few years ago to becoming one of 2 players under 24 to have scored in 2 separate Champions League finals, the other one being some guy named Lionel Messi. I'm not sure you've heard of him. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. So, yeah, safe to say that he has well and truly turned his Madrid career around, and good for him because he is a joy to watch, and he's one of those players that does get you off your seat, and I do really like watching him. He hardly ever looks back to pass the ball. He's always looking forward, trying to make something happen, looking for goal, looking for chances to create, taking his man on. And really anything that Madrid was doing in an attacking sense, Vinicius Jr. was involved in some capacity, and he just looked good. It was just a Vinicius performance. He had the defender on toes. Ryerson just really couldn't keep up. And I do think that if Brazil wins the Copa America, or even Vinicius himself just has a strong showing, I think that could seal the Ballon d'Or for him. And it really is hard to argue. I mean, he won the league and the Champions League. He was a major part in both of them. And then if you add in a Copa America, yeah, I think it'll be his. And once again, it'll be hard to argue. He has the stats to back it up. He's the type of player that would win the Ballon d'Or. It usually goes to an attacking player. And yeah, like I said, he's won 2 very important trophies to win. And if he adds an international trophy, I think his name will be on that Ballon d'Or. Now, Real Madrid did make some substitutions, but honestly, none of them were really to do a whole ton apart from give, say, Toni Kroos a moment with the fans to applaud as he gets subbed off for Luka Modric, and to really just give some of these guys a moment on the pitch for the final. So I'm not really going to talk about their subs because I don't really think there's much to talk about with them. Just more so good for Ancelotti for giving these guys a moment in the Champions League final. Although, they've had their moments in the Champions League, so they don't really need another moment. I'm just kidding, obviously. It is classy to see a manager do that for his players. And Real Madrid win the Champions League, the least shocking headline ever. Now, they're only going to go and add Kylian Mbappe to this mix. I think within the next 8 seasons, Madrid will hit that 20 UCL trophies. There's 5 away. So yeah, I'm saying 5 of the next 8 will probably be Madrid's. They already have a super team, and they're about to add one of the best players, if not the best player in the world, to this super team. And it's going to be really interesting to see how everyone performs together in this Madrid side. I'm kind of excited to see how Mbappe does, but also kind of scared. And now, before I do call it a day on this episode, I do want to acknowledge the end of an era for 2 players. 2 German players, actually. And after the final, there was a picture that I feel is instantly iconic with Dortmund's Marco Reus and Real Madrid's Toni Kroos embracing each other after the final whistle. One was the winner, and one had just come up short yet again. But I want to talk about them both, as it does just feel like such an end of an era moment, and both these guys have had outstanding careers. One of them is retiring, and one of them is, of course, leaving the club in which he's forged a name at. So firstly, Marco Reus, the Borussia Dortmund legend, played his final game for the club that he is synonymous with. A man who never truly saw his loyalty rewarded, in my opinion. One of the few players to kiss the badge and pat the badge and mean it. Trust me, as the years go on, this is going to become extremely rare. You will not see players kissing the badge and meaning it as Marco Reus does. He was Dortmund. He could have left countless times over, but wanted Dortmund. They have been the club ever since he was a child. It is the club of his life. In 2019 and 2023, it looked like he would finally win that Bundesliga title, but on both occasions, Bayern Munich had other plans, and it couldn't have been any closer. I know they finished runner-up, I think, 7 times in his Dortmund career, but those were the 2 years where it really, really felt like it was his year to win that Bundesliga title, a title that he will never win. And then in 2013 and now 2024, he came up short at Wembley in the Champions League final, which, man, it does hurt. I'm a massive Marco Reus fan. He's one of my favorite players ever in general, and probably my favorite player to never have played for Chelsea or have any Canadian links. It would be between him and Griezmann, if I'm being honest. But I just love the way this guy would play, his playmaking ability, his nose for net, the way that he could just dance through defense, the way he controlled the ball, found himself in pockets of space. And like I said, his loyalty is just unmatched at this moment in time, like with players that are obviously playing currently, because yes, there have been players that have been just as or even more loyal than Marco Reus. But I mean, in this day and age, it's second to none, really. Now, he was unlucky with injuries. They'd come at the worst possible times. I'm talking about, the 2014 where Germany won the World Cup and Marco Reus was going to be the star of that team. But then they played a friendly right before the tournament and he gets injured and misses the tournament. And yeah, talk about unlucky. But what a player and what a career. Despite not winning the 2 biggest trophies he could in club football, I do think he will be remembered as a German legend and remembered extremely fondly amongst football fans all over. 429 matches, 170 goals, 131 assists, a 2-time DFB Pokal winner, 3-time DFL Super Cup winner, 3-time Bundesliga Player of the Season, 6 times in the Bundesliga Team of the Season, 2-time German Player of the Year, 1 time in the Champions League Team of the Season, 1 time in the UEFA Team of the Year, the top goal scorer and assist provider in the Bundesliga in 2013-14. Sometimes a legacy is more than the trophies you won and didn't win. What Marco Reus did was pure magic, loyal to his club, and a legend if there ever was one. And it is sad that his Dortmund career ends like this, but what a career he did have with the club, and he truly did live a childhood dream. And now on to the other German in that picture, Toni Kroos, who I did talk about in a previous episode, but I'm going to talk about him again just because he deserves it, and it was his final game with Real Madrid, so I feel like it would be disrespectful of me to not talk about him. And this was, of course, his final game in club football. For years, Toni Kroos has said Real Madrid will be his last club he plays for, and true to his word, it will be. A player that won everything, including 6 Champions Leagues, a World Cup, and not to forget a total of 7 league titles and even more silverware that I'm not going to touch upon because we will be here all day. And now looking at his personal accolades, he was in the Champions League Team of the Season 5 times and German Footballer of the Year of 2018, as well as GQ German Athlete of the Year in 2019. And once again, there are even more individual accolades that he had picked up, but we would be here all day. A true legend of the game if there ever was one, and someone who probably never fully got his due because of the guys that he played around. I'm talking like Ronaldo, Benzema, Bale, just guys like that who always get the headlines. But Toni Kroos was and is one of the greatest midfielders of his generation. The things that he did go unnoticed, I think, but if you truly do watch football and you've watched Toni Kroos, you can see how important he is to any team he's played with and for. And yeah, I do think even watching yesterday, I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, why is he retiring? Why you gotta retire, man? This game still needs players like Toni Kroos. Great playmaker, great controller of the ball, and yeah, just can unlock a defense with a simple pass. And to me, there are midfielders that get talked about as being the best midfielders in the world based on the leagues they play in, whereas Toni Kroos was never in those conversations, whereas I think it's disrespectful that he wasn't. He is one of the greatest midfielders of his generation, and I think it's just disrespectful that he's not in some of these conversations more often. Now, at times he was probably the best midfielder in the world, but didn't get his due, and it is good to see him get his moment with the Real Madrid fans yesterday when he was pulled off for Luka Modric, which I think was also just such a nice moment. The two of them have played together for 10 years now, and they're basically synonymous with each other. You can't have Luka Modric without Toni Kroos at Real Madrid. And now we are going to see that as a reality next season, which does suck. But yeah, just what a career. Truly a dream career when you think about it. 6 UCL titles, in the final 7 times. Only lost once. He only lost once in the Champions League final, and he won 6 times. How absurd is that? Like, oh my goodness. Just what a player. And he will be playing his final games coming this summer, June 14th. The Euros does kick off. So it will be interesting to see how he plays. Like I've said, I do still think he has years left in those legs, but there's something to be said for a man bowing out while he's still at the top of his game. So whether the Euros, Germany go out in the group stage or win the whole thing, we will see him play some of his last games, and we will be saying goodbye to an all-time great. And so all I'm going to say is enjoy him for the next month, because the sport will miss him. There will never be another Toni Kroos. And now that brings us to a close on this edition of the Maple Footy Podcast. Agree or disagree with what I said? Let me know in the comments here, or find me on Instagram, DM me at @officialsamlittle. We can chat about it, and I'd love to hear some opinions, get some conversation going. I do hope you enjoyed, and there are more episodes to come very, very soon. So thank you very much for spending your time with me, and I'll be seeing you around.
And that was your Maple Footy Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Check my socials for any and all future updates at @officialsamlittle on Instagram, where I am most active. And until next time, live, laugh, little.